You're listening to a CNA podcast. Today's episode is all about second chances, fresh starts after a life of crime or persecution.
I didn't choose to become a refugee. Unfortunately, when you look at whatever is going on around the world, no one knows who will be the next refugee.
Did you know Hong Kong doesn't grant asylum or legally recognize refugees? 15,000 people, including Ame Girimana, who you just heard from, fall into this category. Meanwhile, in Japan, former members of crime syndicates known as Yakuza are struggling to find footing in a society they don't feel a part of anymore. I'm Teresa Tang. This week I speak to Michiyo Ishida in Tokyo and Deborah Wong in Hong Kong about the struggles some outliers face in East Asia. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so we're talking about refugees on the one hand, former gangsters on the other, and on the surface, it doesn't really seem like they have much in common. But your stories say otherwise, don't they, Mitch?
Well, Teresa, let me explain to you about Yakuza first. Now, once Yakuza, it's not easy to integrate into Japanese society. For one, people are scared of Yakuza because they are members of the crime syndicate. And there's an image, they will threaten you for money. And their looks, they're quite scary looking too. They wear tattoos, some of them are really gorgeous. And tattoos are basically banned in Japan at swimming pools, for instance, public places. At most hot spring resorts, they're banned. Another physical feature about the Yakuza is that they have trimmed pinky. Now, the origin of the word Yakuza, some documents say, come from a card game called Hanafuda. Hanafuda cards are played with drawings of boars, deer, birds, and Yakuza-related movies often portrayed Yakuza gambling Hanafuda games. And the word Yakuza is associated with the sound of numbers Ya, 8, Ku, 9, and San, Zang, 3. In Hanafuda card games, representing a loser, hopeless, and fallen person. Yakuza is also said to be word ridiculing an overdressed kabuki actor or yakusha, which transformed into the word Yakuza. And the National Police Agency says in their reports, it's the chaotic post-war era. Their activities became more versatile and complicated, selling illegal drugs, intervening businesses to make money.
Okay, so Deb, that's the ex-gangster, but you covered refugees. What's the connection? What inspired this story for you?
So there are about 15,000 refugees in Hong Kong, and that's a city of about 7.3 million. So if you think about numbers, the refugee community is a relatively small one. Their needs are not as visible and prioritized as other segments, even if they do need a lot of support. And, in Michiyo's story, the ex-gangster, they've left a life of danger behind and they're pursuing a better life. And I see the similarity play out in the lives of refugees in Hong Kong. And when you consider how ethnic homogeneous and culturally homogeneous both Japan and Hong Kong are, I think the outliers in the communities like Yakuzas and refugees, they do stand out. So this really ultimately is a story about acceptance and I think above all resilience.
Mm-hmm. Michiyo, you introduced us to an ex-Yakuza member and his name is Tatsuya Shindo. Before we get to his story though, can you explain the position of Yakuza in Japanese society today? And I'm curious, have you ever had any personal encounters with them before this assignment?
Okay, let me explain to you about the number of Yakuza members. It's actually falling according to the police agency. From its peak of 90,000 in 1991, today their number is around 20,000. It's due to Yakuza retiring from old age, just as the entire Japanese population is aging, and also stricter laws in place which bans anyone to associate with a criminal syndicate. And since criminal syndicates started to lose membership, and to be a member, it's actually necessary to pay membership fee into the crime syndicate. And as their activities are closely monitored by police, their source of income has been limited to selling drugs and being involved in scams. Now, as to my personal encounters, well, it's very limited, actually. I was at one time approached by a fairly young man when I was filming with the camera crew, some generic shots around the red light district of Tokyo, maybe about 10 years ago. This man asked me, what was I filming? And he demanded my business card. Of course, I refused. Why should I? They're not the police. But the man insisted, and he said he needed information he can provide to please his boss. He then began to soften his tone, asking for any name or any kind of number. So I wrote down a generic, non-domestic phone number that, he won't be able to phone because he doesn't speak another language. I gave it to him. He went away. So since I haven't really faced any run-ins with Yakuza, and most people in Japan won't unless you're linked to a crime syndicate or had business deals with them.
Okay, so they generally leave the population alone then. You mentioned many have quit the Yakuza. They've tried to start a new life, but there are barriers, not least of which is the stigma of their past, right?
Yeah, let me explain to you what Tatsuya Shindo told me. He was in jail 3 times for illegal drugs, arrested multiple times. Even though he completed his term in jail, Japanese society, he said, was unforgiving. If he were to find a proper job, he had to hide any signs of his Yakuza past. So he had to, for instance, hide his tattoos. 20 years ago, when he was Yakuza, the law was not as tough as today towards crime syndicates. Still, there were major hurdles for him to integrate into society. And this is what Tatsuya Shindo explained to me.
For 5 years after you are released from prison, contracts cannot be signed. You cannot get a credit card, rent a place, apply for a mortgage for a car, or open a bank account. Today, if you can't open an account, you can't work. If your income cannot be remitted, they know why.
Many refugees, asylum seekers in Hong Kong, Deb, they're living in limbo, really, as they wait to be processed. They're handcuffed, so to speak. What is the public discourse in Hong Kong like around them? Are they generally accepted? Are they shunned, or are they ignored?
It's interesting that you used the word handcuffed, because that's exactly what happened to Ame Girimana, the man that we heard at the start of this podcast. And he was talking about how no one plans to become a refugee. Now, Ame's story was quite interesting. He was a human rights lawyer from Burundi, and he discovered that he was a target of assassination back then. And he only discovered this 2 hours before the deed was supposed to happen. So he fled to Hong Kong with, just a single suitcase. And it was really the only place he could enter without a visa 20 years ago. But upon landing in Hong Kong, he was handcuffed. And Ame told me that he was shocked because he thought that Hong Kong was an international city. And so, with that perception in mind, he was very surprised to know that he was being handcuffed without given the chance to explain his situation. So that was 2 decades ago. Ame is still in Hong Kong awaiting resettlement to a host country. And he says that public discourse over the last 20 years has certainly improved, because Hong Kong does have NGOs like the Justice Center as well as the Christian Action Center for Refugees, and they both advocate for refugees. But by and large, the refugee community is still a relatively invisible one. I say that because there are misconceptions that refugees have to deal with. They have to fend off accusations that they're abusing the judicial process to prolong their stay in Hong Kong. It also doesn't help that the government considers them as overstayers or illegal immigrants. So I think the labeling plays a huge part in this prejudice. And the general public, because of that, prefers not to engage with them. In fact, they call them dangerous, when in fact many like Ame were actually professionals back in their home country. But there has been progress. Ame himself works for the Justice Center, and the NGOs, they do hold talks, they hold volunteer sessions and joint activities to break all these stereotypes. So I say that it is a work in progress.
So officially, Hong Kong doesn't grant asylum or recognize refugees, but they also don't necessarily send these people back to their home countries either. Can you explain that?
Well, what it creates is a state of limbo. When the refugees first arrive in Hong Kong, they must first apply for non-refoulement. Now, that arrangement prevents them from being sent back to a country where they could face death or irreparable harm or even torture. But that arrangement, it's hard to get. There were about 29,000 claims in the last 15 years, and only 330 were successful or substantiated. And that process can take a very long time. I don't have arrange for you. There is no like 2 to 3 years because each case is complex, each case is unique. I've even heard of a case that had to endure a 17-year wait. So immigration rules changed in the last 2 years as well, and now authorities can send back refugees if they fail to get their claim substantiated at the first instance. Now, I spoke to a Pakistani woman. Her name is Usman Naveed. She finally managed to get substantiated after 8 years, just before the policy changed. Have a listen.
I got my case rejected 3 times. Saying that your family hasn't been targeted yet. Your family doesn't have any scars of gunshot on your body. So that's why they keep rejecting my case. And you keep waiting and waiting. 8 years is not a small amount. Last year in July, when I got a call from the immigration saying, oh, we have some good news for you. That is the only news that any asylum seeker wants to hear.
So there's a lot of anxiety while they wait for this long-drawn judicial process. You know, they're not allowed to work. They only receive a monthly allowance of about US $400 from the government. And Hong Kong tops the list as one of the most expensive places to live in. So you can imagine their quality of life isn't great. And they need to constantly worry about where to find food, how to buy stationery for the kids that they intend to send to school. So all these daily necessities that, you know, we take for granted is something that they have to worry about.
Mm-hmm. And in that clip, we hear Uzma speaking about scars, right? And Michiyo, we know the body of an ex-Yakuza is like a billboard for his past. You can see all his tattoos and what that means. He's also missing a finger, right? As you mentioned, they have to trim off one of the digits. What was the turning point for Tetsuya? And when you talked to him, did you actually buy this new image that he was projecting? Did it feel authentic?
Well, when Tetsuya was in prison 20 years ago, he told me that there were many in prison reading the Bible. And out of curiosity, he asked that his then wife bring him one. She did. And he quoted me a passage from Ezekiel chapter 33. This is how it goes. I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die? Now, this passage gave him hope despite his sinful past, and this, he told me, was his turning point. He left prison while taking up odd jobs. He studied at a seminary and opened his own church. He started one at his mother's former bar. Now, today he runs his own church at a proper place, and it's really sought after. And he preaches also at various churches. He finds his most important mission to preach is at a jail, prison, where there are Yakuzas or former Yakuzas, social outcasts, those, people who he can share his understanding with. And I went to his church. I met a former drug addict man imprisoned until last year for raping a woman, but he denied the fact that he did, to me at least. And Pastor Shindo also often goes to disaster areas to offer relief goods with his former Yakuza buddies.
So you bought this changed man? You think he really has turned a leaf?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I really thought that he was genuinely a new man. He's starting a new life and is helping a lot of people restarting their lives as well.
So within the church walls, I get it. I can understand people accepting this gangster turned pastor person. But outside of those walls, what happens? Are perceptions of ex-Yakuza changing? Are people still scared of them?
Okay, well, Pastor Shindo told me once the Yakuza society still hold a negative perception. So it's really difficult for many former Yakuza to integrate into society. If there are crimes, murders, the general public will tend to think immediately that they must be related to the Yakuza. I would think so too. And the Yakuza continues to have difficulties getting jobs, renting an apartment, opening bank accounts to own, for instance, a smartphone. So what will they do? It's common they have no choice but to commit crimes again to be able to survive. But Pastor Shindo thinks the number of members of crime syndicates will continue to dwindle, and in a few decades, he thinks that they will disappear. In any case, Pastor Shindo is happy. There are people out there who accept him, and here's his comment.
I'm extremely happy. A former convict can have such influence and speak in front of so many people. I can give a helping hand to others, even if it's in a small way. I'm really happy to be able to do what I am.
Deb, you spoke to a man. He was born in Hong Kong as a refugee. He's gone to school in Hong Kong, but he was still pretty reluctant to go on camera and reveal his identity as he told you his story. And you even had to change his name, right? Why this level of secrecy?
Majority of the refugee community fled to Hong Kong because they encountered some sort of danger in their home country. And, for that reason, it was difficult to get interviewees, much less getting them in front of camera. And we didn't want to place them in a position where they could be recognized by someone back home and inadvertently put a target on their families who are still in their home country. In fact, we've had 2 interviewees cancel on us last minute, even if we did offer anonymity, because there was a very strong sense that they could be in danger. And the other reason has a lot to do with just a desire to be accepted. Now, the person that you mentioned, I interviewed him, he only wanted to be known as Adrian. He's now in his early 20s. So he went through the public school system and even got permission to enter university. But hardly any of his schoolmates or friends know of his background. They don't know that he's a refugee. And at the heart of it, I think he doesn't want to be judged or seen as an illegal immigrant in a city that he's basically grown up in. So let's hear more from him.
I lived here for 16 years, which is more than any other place in the world that I lived in. I have friends from Hong Kong and I know their native language. So I believe I should be qualified as being a Hong Konger, and I believe I am a Hong Konger.
And I think the key lesson that I took away here is that status is important to the refugees because they're also left out of social benefits that other Hong Kongers do get. Now, one example was a massive fire actually took place in Jordan, in Kowloon in Hong Kong. And that house was called Lucky House Building. The fire erupted a few months ago, and that building actually houses many refugees as well as migrants who are on a work visa. Everyone else were able to receive food subsidies, vouchers and support when they showed up to collect it at the residential center, but the refugees were turned away simply because they were not considered legitimate residents. I think that's the key difference when we talk about the refugee community. Their needs are quite acute, but they do not necessarily receive the same support that other segments do.
So that's what happens on a domestic level, I guess. But unfortunately, what happens in Hong Kong doesn't happen in a bubble. Geopolitical events, they're also impacting the situation that refugees in the territory face too, right?
Yeah, definitely. There are 2 ways to look at this. We see the situation Ukraine and Gaza unfolding and we immediately think mass displacement. But I did learn from the NGOs that the borders are not so porous after all. Citizens from affected countries, they do get stopped at borders and turned back when a situation develops because authorities fear that they might overstay. So despite what's happened, across the world, NGOs did tell me that the volume of refugees or asylum seekers remain rather constant, meaning to say there's no sudden influx. Now, secondly, funding has certainly been affected. NGOs are saying that donors, they're right now prioritizing humanitarian relief efforts in the more affected zones in the world. And because their needs are more urgent, they're more acute, that attention has shifted away. And so funding channels in Hong Kong towards refugees have definitely narrowed.
Yeah, there's only so much to go around, right? I'm so inspired hearing about these folks that you guys talk to. They faced so much adversity. Some continue to do so. And I'm curious, what struck you the most about their perseverance? Is there one thing that you found in particular that keeps them going, Mitch?
Well, Tatsuya Shindo, meeting him, I saw him as really charismatic, filled with energy, but he's overcome a lot. A few things I like to mention is his father took his own life after he became a pastor. And his daughter, his then wife, never told his daughter that she had a father. But he got to know her after a while. Since she was a teenager, she actually took her own life in 2017. So there have been a series of events that were really devastating for him. And at one point, he said that he could not carry on as a pastor. But with support of many people around him and realizing that many people need him, need his support, he said that he decided that he must keep on going and he is continuing his job, his role as a pastor.
I was struck by how generous in spirit the refugees are. These are people who have struggled and sacrificed so much to make a life in Hong Kong, and they continue to struggle financially in the city, but I was blown away by how many of them continue to show up as volunteers at food drives, at sharing sessions, at charity events. Amy Girimana, the man that I interviewed, he is a core member of the Justice Centre. He shows up for weekly food drives and he greets every refugee that he meets by name, and they even know him by name. So this is a community that we're looking at. Their home away from home. They have so little, but they give so much. And they all tell me that they want to be productive and they want to dismantle any prejudice the wider society has of them. And at the core of it, I learned that we should never underestimate hope, because it does lead you on journeys that offer so much growth.
Mitch, Deb, thank you so much for sharing these stories with us. Very inspiring. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
A reminder, too, that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can find Deb and Michiyo's reports on YouTube as well as on cna.asia. The team behind this week's episode is Arjun Bala, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Until next week.